Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I'm Nicole Forbes with Dennis's 70s. It's a new year and we are today talking about air plants, also known as tillandsias, and aeriums as just a way to display them and kind of a fun indoor craft for any of us to do after the new year and, taking down some of your holiday decorations and things. You may be looking at a house that is less festive. You might have leftover glassware, for example, vases or display glass that now you can find a repurposed use for. So the range of shapes and sizes of tillandsias or air plants is really kind of one of the things that makes them fun to collect and have multiples of. They belong to a larger family known as Bromeliaceae or bromeliads, and they're all epiphytic or semi-epiphytic plants. So a bromeliad, this is a perfect example of a classic bromeliad that many of us are familiar with growing in our homes. And this type of bromeliad, we water by adding liquid to the center, kind of a reservoir that is a structure held within the plant, rather than typically watering the roots of a bromeliad, because the roots don't have the same responsibility to pull water up to hydrate the foliage like a non-epiphytic plant does. We've got our little example of a non-epiphytic plant over here as well. So bromeliads have kind of a wide range, and the homes that the different kind of regions or homes that these plants originate from really does vary as well. So they don't just come from one tropical island, that makes them rare or exclusive. They come from or grow in a multitude of environments, from, as I mentioned, more of a dense tropical jungle type environment, but also in mountains and arid regions of South and Central America, for example. So they are even found in the southern part of the United States. So as a young person, I lived in Florida for several years. And just like for us in the Pacific Northwest, nowadays, after a windstorm, big clumps of moss and lichen blow out of our big trees and kind of, end up on the ground here as storm debris. Well, in Florida as a kid, after a big windstorm, what would end up raining down and, landing in the gutters and all over the ground would be tillandsias that were blown out of the trees, the surrounding trees. And as a resourceful kid, my friends and I would just ride bikes through the neighborhood, picking up air plants in garbage bags, and we would glue them onto pieces of driftwood and sell them to tourists with, magnets attached to the back or whatever. So if you were in Sarasota in the early 80s and you got yourself a little magnet with an air plant on it, could have been me that made it. So the different appearance of these plants, the way that they look, is usually indicative of the adaptations that they've made to the environments that they live in. So that's an obvious statement, I guess, as most things are, the appearance of most things are due to adaptations to the environment that they originated in. But we can see nice range. Here's this amazing Tillandsia xerographica here. This is capitata, and the size of this, of course, way larger than even two hands. So one of the larger specimens of Tillandsia, but this is still like a singular piece of the plant. So as a tillandsia matures, they can create offsets or babies and end up being as big as like a soccer ball or a basketball and round often as well. So this large example gives us an easy to kind of identify and locate specimen to really kind of just look at the different parts of the plant. So we've got the nice, whirl of the growth pattern with new growth coming out of the tips of the plant. And then on the back side, we have rough, it's hard and dry, but some sort of material that resembles roots. Now, the roots on a tillandsia, as I mentioned, do nothing more than attach the plant to the structure that it's normally growing on when it lives out in nature. So that in nature would be the trunk or roots of a tree, or the side of a rock or a boulder. The roots themselves just hold on almost like algae does in the ocean. So we don't need to worry about kind of, how long or how good the roots look necessarily on your air plant. Now, what we also see on this particular variety is that there's a fair amount of silver on the foliage itself. And with my fingers, I can actually rub some of the silver off. So you can see that some of the silver has already been kind of gently rubbed off where I've been handling it. And I'll just kind of show you a little bit more so you can see how that silver comes off, and you can kind of turn it green. So the silver is not in the leaf itself. The silver is sort of a layer on top of the foliage, and you can see it both on the top and the bottom of the leaf in this particular variety. The silver effect that also sometimes even makes the plant look fuzzy. In fact, here is a close-up of one that is literally fuzzy, almost looks like little close-ups of moth antennae or something. If you look at it, you can see tiny little hairs on the plant. So sometimes you can't see those hairs, sometimes you can. Those little fuzzy silvery gray hairs are called trichomes. So trichomes, like three, and then comb like you would comb your hair, only spelled a little bit different. Trichomes are these structures that sit on top of the foliage themselves and help to absorb moisture straight out of the air, as well as trichomes can help the tillandsias regulate their temperature. So it keeps them from feeling the extremes of like a chilly Florida morning, oh, brr, Florida, or, extra heat when it gets really hot. And the humidity of the air that they live in allows them to just get the moisture that they need by absorbing it through those trichomes. Now, we will obviously do our best to give these plants in our homes a similar environment to what they are used to growing in their native climates. However, indoor air humidity is usually not going to be as high as it is in a tropical environment, and certainly not during the wintertime. When the winter we're running our furnaces or fireplaces or heaters, and the air tends to dry out even more dramatically. So when you kind of feel, your skin is dry, you're looking for chapstick, that also kind of indicates that your indoor air is drier, which may cause you to need to either water your air plants for a longer period of time or more frequently to compensate for the drier air that you have. Now, that being said, honestly, these are low maintenance plants. They are also non-toxic and pet safe. They don't need or want to grow in dirt or with soil. And you could easily take them, to the sink or to a separate place, soak them in their water once a week or so, and then return them to their, display area, which makes them an excellent office plant, desk plant, I've tried to grow one in my car, and it was too bright. So, not a bright idea on my part, but too bright, because I have a moon roof and I keep it open all the time. And I think direct sun shining in on my little air plant, it got too hot and too dry in my car. So it's not a great car plant, although I'm still looking for a good car plant. The range, of places where you can have and display and care for an air plant are pretty wide, versus the dirt and the water and everything of having a regular potted plant. Now, the handout, as usual, is attached to the description or the title of this video. So you'll see it just as a hyperlink right below the welcome to our Tillandsias and or air plants and aeriums class. And on the handout, you'll see also a separate link that can take you to kind of a easily broken down care sheet on how to take care of air plants. But really, again, it's all about giving them diffused light. Indirect but bright light is great. I keep most of my air plants right in a north-facing window, which ends up being medium light. Even right in the window, it's not very bright, so it's medium light for them. And I have a few others that are further away from a light source, so they get rotated out. So every week or so when I'm watering, I will take one of the plants that's been in the window and put it on the coffee table instead of keeping the same plant on the coffee table where it may not be bright enough light for it. So another, like they're interchangeable practically. So you've got a lot of flexibility on them. Now they, like I mentioned, can sunburn. So putting them in a real hot, next to your succulents, for example, in a bright light with direct sunlight on them for hours a day is not their ideal environment. They're used to being in an understory setting where they have light filtered through other leaves or other foliage above and around them before the light gets to them. So lower light for, bright to medium light. Lower light, you'll want to rotate them out so that they're getting at least a chance to have some brighter light in between. And then watering. Now, watering on the air plants is really quite basic. It does need to be done. It's air in the Pacific Northwest, at least, and in our homes is not enough, as I mentioned, to give them the hydration that they need. But it's essentially something that can be done weekly. Now, you can adjust your watering to sometimes every 2 weeks or so in the winter months as the light is lower. But again, as I mentioned, if your indoor air is really dry, you also want to be aware of that and not let your plants get too dry in between waterings. And watering is as simple as having a very special Tupperware container or, glass container or whatever bowl that holds water. So it doesn't have to be anything particular. And then we fill it with room temperature water. So I've had this sitting for a couple of hours in this bowl. I can barely feel the water, so that's perfect. It's about the temperature of my hands or the room. And then we're going to take one of our air plants, the entire plant, and put it in the bowl of water. So now I did put it upside down. Doesn't matter. You could put it right side up. I just try to make sure that as much of the foliage as possible gets covered and is submerged in water. Now it's soaking, and we'll leave it soaking in that for 15-20 minutes. When it's done soaking, you take your little air plant out of the water and it's dripping wet. So now it's important to get as much of the excess water off as possible. The trichomes have done their job and they've absorbed the water. In many cases, you take a silvery looking plant and dunk it in water, and when you take it out, it looks greener because those trichomes have now absorbed the water. And as it gets drier, it'll turn silvery again. But now we're going to turn it upside down and shake it, shake it, shake it. Maybe even I got some water drops on the camera. That would be exciting. So we shake off as much water as we can. Now it's not dripping dry, not dripping anymore. And then the next thing I'm going to do is let it sit upside down, or worst case scenario, kind of sideways. But ideally it sits upside down for the next hour or so to completely drain the water away from the base of the plant. Now, I brought this plant from home because I wanted to talk about some of my own plants that I've had and cared for years. And so I've been doing I traveled for Christmas. I've been, I've been myself. I've been busy. And so right now, I haven't been the greatest waterer of my air plants. I did water them on Monday for the first time in probably 2 weeks or more. And this particular plant I noticed is looking like it's gotten dry. So on the lower portion, I can see that some of the foliage is kind of wrinkly. And I also noticed that the leaves themselves are rolled up pretty tight. And I think that that's a good indication that this plant's gotten a little bit drier than it wanted. And I've got a couple of brown leaves. So this happens every so often. A brown leaf, it's not going to turn green again. So I'm going to remove it from the base. And I'm going to say, I'm sorry, I will water you more often. I'm going to take that one off too. They're just kind of sheathed on top of one another. So usually the lowest ones are the ones that turn brown the first. So now I've kind of groomed it. It looks a little bit better. And in the center of this plant, I can see that the new growth is actually looking quite healthy. So I may have intervened and watered it in just the right amount of time. But if we also look closely, which is why I brought this one along, it's making a baby. So here, can you see it? Here in the side, kind of coming right out from one of the scales of the plant, it's making an entirely new plant that eventually could be separated off on its own. And another, so this is another one of my wild air plants from home. And this wild child I call her Busy Mama, because Busy Mama makes babies all the time. In fact, you can see this one here is growing up and is probably soon able to be disconnected. I've got another youngster here, and then it's just kind of wild with kids that won't leave home. You know how that makes you crazy, so you can see that she's probably a little on the crazy side. But one of Busy Mama's babies is right here, so you can see as they slowly grow. The main plant is probably about as big as it's going to get. So the youngsters, it's not like everyone is going to be able to get this size. That just doesn't happen. So this variety will get to about this size and then probably start making babies of its own. And another one that makes babies, but it's a lot harder to see here, is the little snowflakey one that I was showing earlier. This one has on its side, it has quite a few little babies. That one I have separated off to show you the size of the baby of this air plant. Now, honestly, I've had this baby for at least a year now, so it's maybe doubled in size already. It's a slow growing little thing. And more than once I thought I've lost it when I just throw all of them into kind of a big bowl and water them at once. But I count them as they go in, I count them as they come out, and I just make sure that there's no tillandsia left behind. So appearance and the difference in appearance on these plants can also help us to kind of intuit or guess how much moisture they want. The big bulbous example here with much thicker leaves, and you can see the kind of silvery sheen. Maybe it looks almost powdery in the camera, but the silvery sheen that's covering this is a fine fur of trichomes all over the leaf. So this one's got, again, the ability to soak up water. In fact, if I put this in water, we'll get those trichomes wet. And now you can see it doesn't look silver at all. Well, maybe it looks less silver. Hopefully it looks a lot greener now in the picture. So that's the role that those trichomes play. And on this guy, again, make sure we dump out the water and let it drip dry. So shake, 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 and drip dry upside down. Sometimes in a juice glass or a little bowl helps to keep them upside down to drip dry. But the greener, the less silver, the less trichomes the plant has. So the less fuzzy, the less silver, the more frequent that plant needs to be dunked or hydrated, because it doesn't grab hold of the moisture quite the way that these real silvery or feathery ones do. So you can observe all of the, different appearances of your tillandsias as you get more and start collecting them, to kind of gauge how often to water or how long to water them. Honestly, with the way that I care for mine, I like to water them all at the same time for the same amount of time, and not have specific tillandsias that have different needs than others. So I tend to keep my collection all amongst kind of the similar style of plants, because then their needs fit my style of care for them. Humidifiers really don't, they help, but they don't compensate for watering. And same with spritzing. You can spritz in between waterings if your plant doesn't seem to be making it between waterings, but really it's better to fully hydrate, fully drain it, and then just allow it time to be watered again. Now, if you're putting them into aeriums or vessels that are closed, that have a closed top, we also know that that creates a higher pocket of humidity inside a closed container. But an open top, such as this little vessel here, kind of like a fish bowl, but the opening is oriented more towards the outside. This gives us really just airflow, so not as much humidity that ends up being held inside an open aerium, but aeriums can be open or closed. Now, fertilizer on air plants, it's again, there are some pre-made formulas of fertilizer. You can also feed a light, just put it in your dunking water, like a diluted solution that's made for orchids. But wonderful things that you may have at home that could be fertilizer for your air plants include aquarium water. So obviously not a salt tank, but just the kind of fish poopy water from your aquarium as you're cleaning it. That's going to be great for the air plants. Nothing with water softener in it or any kind of treatment. So make sure that they don't, you haven't had any additives in the water. If you have an outdoor pond, again, as long as it hasn't been treated with anything, some of that outdoor pond water, fantastic for soaking your air plants every so often, just to give them extra minerals and some nutrients. Believe it or not, even dust. Don't you love a plant that likes dust? So dust actually can give the plant some nutrients and minerals. So even just living in your home, living in my home, I know they're well fed. So dust can be beneficial for them. I Can't stress enough the kind of interchangeability and fun that you can have with these plants. And the aerium concept is just one example. Oh, I want to talk about dyed, artificially colored or color enhanced air plants. So you will see tillandsias that are bright colors. Some are purple or red or pink. This is an artificial coloration that is done to them to, I don't know, make them more attractive. Now, artificially color enhanced plants will slowly fade and lose their color over time, and especially as they grow, because of course the new growth won't have been color enhanced. So some air plants in the wild can take on some different colors as a response to environmental stressors or different conditions like that. But this, when you see them brightly colored in shops and places, that's usually, again, color enhanced artificially with like a food safe, like a food coloring or a plant safe dye. So that will fade over time. And ways to display. So here's another little color enhanced tillandsia, but this is like the cutest, smallest macrame hanging you've ever seen. And it has a tiny little pocket that really is never going to fit a plant. So, maybe a crystal or something like that, but looks really fun with just a small air plant. Hang that on the wall and make sure that the air plant is easily removed so that you can water it and then put it back in. Occasionally I see really cool looking displays where the tillandsia are clearly glued onto wood or glued onto a seashell or something like that. And I admit we glued ours onto driftwood when I was 12 and didn't know any better, but gluing them on makes them really hard to water, unless of course you can take the entire thing that it's glued onto and water that as well. So consider that when you want to attach the air plant to another surface. Now, I've got this awesome piece of driftwood here that driftwood looks kind of natural with air plants. Something about the color and the textures of the driftwood really just make them great ways to display air plants. But making a nest for them or kind of a situation where you can rest the air plant in and then remove it easily for watering is really going to be the best way to keep everything healthy. The other options, of course, now like at home, I have some weird tropical like seed pods that I picked up somewhere along the way, and I've attached some wires into them, and the seed pods kind of cracked open. So the tillandsias sit in the seed pods and they hang in my window. But also a little branch of like a manzanita or a pretty little twiggy wreath such as this, we could easily just tuck air plants in and amongst the twigs, and that gives us something nice and bright and cheery, but they can easily again be removed to be cared for and replaced back into the display. You may be tempted to use some wire to attach the air plants to other structures, and that's fine. However, avoid anything that is copper-based or copper wire. So copper is toxic to tillandsia in general, and so you can use fishing line or acrylic, filament. You can use other wire that's not copper, but often you'll see copper wire available for bonsai, and it's easy to manipulate. Avoid the copper wire because it can it'll kill, damage, and slowly kill the tillandsia. It's another fun display prop before we get to the aeriums, and that's this really cool wall unit here made by Carter and Rose. So it's just got a hook on the back, hangs right onto your wall. A larger version here does the same thing, just hangs directly on the wall. And this little air plant there probably needs a bigger one. Actually, here's my big, maybe my big girl can sit in there. So there we've got that kind of fun display, as well as the idea of setting them into these little cups. Busy mama doesn't want to fit. There we go. Setting them into these little cups and displaying them as such. They can come right out. They can come right out to water as well. Now, aeriums hardly need a lot of explanation or description, but it's a funny word. Aeriums are like, okay, the fish in the fish tank is an aquarium, right? The jar with plants in it and dirt that we've closed up and are watching grow is a terrarium. And then we take away the water and we take away the dirt, and what we have is an aerium. So no terra and no aqua. So an aerium is simply a glass vessel with some sort of substrata or material and a, collection of either natural elements or, there's nothing that says you couldn't make a Lego aerium or, anything like that. So you could use other items. We've got, just in this example, some white sand, a little geode, and some marbles, as well as my fun little air plant that's just tucked in there. And again, we can take it out, water it. Once it's dripped dry, we can put it right back in there. You can, excuse me, as I mentioned, you go with a small enclosed vessel, such as this one, but we've got to then make sure that the air plant that we choose, is going to have the right scale or be able to fit in there. So I wouldn't necessarily want to try to put this big guy into this vessel, but the right size and shape of plant could easily go in here and be removed easily as well. If you love specialized tools, which I love specialized tools, but some of these really can make the creation of terrariums and aeriums a lot easier. The tweezers are awesome for getting things in and out of tiny spaces without, sticking all your fingers in or dislodging the whole creation. A very teeny tiny spade or shovel will help you to move material around. The rake is probably not super practical, but goes with the set. And the little brush is, again, just going to keep your glass clean, brush off any sand that's, gotten on other things. So believe it or not, if you don't use this brush, you'll probably be raiding your makeup kit for some nice soft blush brush that costs like as much as the whole set, if not twice as much. So there are some really great tools that you can use which help get in and out and keep things clean. But wow, that little guy, see, I had him upside down and he had dripped out a lot more water even after I shook it. So the upside down draining is not a step to be skipped, or else you'll be, in no time, you'll see that your air plant is rotting. And the rotting, I should talk about that. The rotting is going to first appear as like a darkening on the lowest portion of the stem. And you'll start to just be able to, how I was taking some of those old scales off. The old scales on the rotten one will just fall off. And before you know it, I found a rotten one in here. Before you know it, it just falls apart. Oh, so sad. So that's what happens if we don't let them dry out in between waterings. See that little poor plant? Its death was not in vain. So here's just another easy fishbowl style glass. This one happens to have just a fun little holder, so we've got a different style of display. And although usually I'm trying to work in a dry one, this one's gotten wet from my plant inside, so I'm going to try to compensate here. Now I've used some white sand on this one. I'm going to go with more of like a natural sand for this one. And because I want to pour it all in there, I've just put it into a plastic cup that makes it easier for me to get into the vessel. I'm going to use about that much. And like I said, because I've got it wet. Sorry. Because it's wet, it is stuck to the sides a little bit. So I'm just going to shake it, make it even, and we can clean that up afterwards or when we're finished. So here, drop them right in there. Now, we're going to use hope. Everybody needs some hope. So we're going to throw a little hope in there. And this is a fun activity to do, but also makes great gifts. Valentine's Day is right around the corner, so this could be a nice thing to do for somebody for Valentine's Day. I'll take this color enhanced one and drop it in there because that's just a little extra bling. And then maybe a quartz crystal. I mean, we can go very, very simple, for example. So in threes gives us kind of something harmonious to look at, but it is just a pretty scene. You could throw a seashell in there, add a peacock feather, a little tiny clump of dried lichen or moss, change it up for the holidays with a little pine cone, or do you like glitter? Add glitter. Why not? There's no limit to creativity or rules. Like I said, Legos, sequins, buttons. There's all kinds of fun things you can make an aerium out of. And buttons, I think that would be cool. I just came up with that one. So show us your wild side. Show us some of your creativity. And if you do build an aerium now, today, next week, next year, send us a picture. We would love to be inspired by what you make as well. And if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them after the video is over. So be sure to type them into the comments. And as usual, that's about it. Thanks for watching. Happy gardening.